Hello, this is Erica with Launching Legacies. Welcome to our daily devotional. Today we are continuing our series on entropy, control, receptivity. And I'm going to talk about, yesterday we talked about choosing receptivity over control versus control in response to entropy. And so today I'm just going to kind of briefly dialogue with you about control versus entropy. So although we may not all know the term entropy, that might not be something that people are familiar with. We understand chaos, and we get what happens. Most people get what happens when things are left alone or to their own demise. Thus, the phrase "left to their own demise" meaning left to their own destruction, right? Left to their own degrading. And so when we think about this concept, we realize that most things can't just be left. Most people get that. Social, emotional, and relationship things kind of sometimes fall into this category where they do get left alone. But for most other operating systems in the world, we think, no, this can't just be left alone. Something has to be done. Some action has to be taken. Something has to happen. But it's easy to assume that that action is to take control. Because entropy is such a destructive force, right? It makes everything go chaotic, everything fall apart, everything decay, everything essentially just die and cease to operate correctly. And so when we see world systems and people interacting with world systems, which is almost everybody in organizations, in communities, even in relationships, the tendency is to prevent this destruction from happening, thereby taking control of the situation. And although it makes sense because it becomes a heartfelt issue, it's not always the best approach. And we're going to talk about why that might not always be the best approach today. So let's assume, I want to use an example because I'm from a community that is impoverished, and I worked with, for very, very many years, I worked with the church in that community. And so because the community is impoverished, then poverty, or the system of poverty, which is a world system, influenced the church and the people around the church. And so what we saw was that the church leaders, because they could see what poverty was doing, they would become extremely controlling and to counteract what poverty would do to the church as an organization. Because church is a man-made structure, right? Structured religion is not faith. It's just structured religion. And so because these churches operated in, it was a system of churches, so these churches operated in impoverished areas, there was a great amount of control used in the ministry in order to keep what they thought the integrity of the church would be and keep it from being influenced by the entropy that was acting in poverty, right? So the vehicle for this entropy was poverty, and poverty would make people be desperate. It'll make people, it'll cause people to feel lost. It'll cause them to do all kinds of things to survive. And if you are not impoverished or not from or haven't seen an impoverished area, it's kind of difficult to understand. But these churches were established in impoverished areas. And so what we saw was, in order to counteract that poverty, there was a great amount of control, and the control was set to kind of, again, keep this entropy from expanding into the church or, into the community as much as possible. But when those churches operated, the biggest flaw in that control mechanism was that it didn't allow for vulnerability. And in impoverished areas, if people don't identify with you as someone who's relevant to their situation or their struggle, then you're not helpful at all. Like, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, but they also don't care how much you know until they understand the cultural significance of who you are. You can't be a instructor in a community that you don't have anything to do with who they are or get who they are. You don't even understand it. And when control takes effect, well, particularly in these organizations, and I've seen it in numerous other ones over time, but when the control takes effect, there is an automatic disconnect, right? Because it's like, okay, this is what we're doing. And so everything gets held tightly. Everything is micromanaged. Everything is detail. And the reason for it is positive in that they're trying to prevent things from getting out of hand. However, that system of pulling back to make sure everything is detailed, controlled, prevents them from connecting with the people that are also a part of this system. And so even though it seems like, okay, we're preventing poverty from spreading and becoming a decay and killing the church and killing the community, the truth of the matter is not stopping that from happening, because entropy is acting on individual lives in these communities that you're never touching because they don't see the relevance of who you are. And so although it seems controlled, the only thing that really is controlled is the organization or the structure, the box that you've created. Nothing else is impacted, because you can't impact anything else, because micromanaging and taking care of all the little nuances keeps you from being able to go outside of your box, because if it's outside of your control, it's not beneficial. And so what happens is churches that use these practices of control, or systems, any person or thing that would use this type of practice of control, because I've seen it in relationships too, they don't grow. They don't grow. They stay right where they are. They stay in the little box. Relationships become complacent and people become stuck, right? They don't flourish. The people don't make each other better in the relationship. Nothing happens that expands, right? Or has anything to do with a drive or a movement outward. These churches stay small, controlled, and don't impact much of the community they were established in. Because control is not the answer to entropy all the time. Most of the time. I'm going to say almost never the answer. I put it on there. It's not always the answer on my title, but truthfully, it's almost never the answer. Because control doesn't allow us the relationship that's necessary for true positive change against chaos, against destruction. And so what happens? Yes, these churches were impacted by poverty, in that the poverty of the community, although it didn't infect and completely deteriorate the church, it stunted the church's growth, because the church needed control in order to maintain its structure, and that control prevented it from going out into the community. And so we find all these little tiny microscopic churches in inner city communities, because they don't know how to impact change in the community without being in control, and that control prevents them from growing. And so you see this happening. You see it happening with businesses too. I struggle with that as with my business, which is also a ministry, knowing that this entropy, this system of chaos is in the world. Very obvious because of the work that we're doing, right? We're going in to help families. Some of them are impacted by social welfare or social programs. They lost their children and relationships are falling apart. People need help. People need support. They have all these different nuances or problems where things are falling apart. And so when we look at all of that, it's crazy, chaotic, a mess. And so in order to hold the ministry, for me to hold Launching Legacies and to keep it growing, sometimes it feels like I need to grab control and hold control. Otherwise it'll be impacted. But every time I practice that or exercise that in my ministry with my organization, I find I'm connecting less with the people I've established the ministry, or the ministry was established to affect. And so I find myself needing to let go a little bit more, needing to be more transparent, needing to diminish the control. And so it becomes a frightening thing, because if all you know is that you need control to counter entropy, and we found out that control actually doesn't work if you're trying to actually affect people, then we got a problem. So control is not the answer. And the devotional yesterday gave us another opportunity, which is receptivity. We need to be able to receive. And so if we are operating in control, thinking that that's going to keep things from becoming chaotic, we're probably wrong if that system, in particular, if that system involves people, because it doesn't work that way. Entropy is something that operates on this world system. We're not going to impact that and change it, because it's a part of what God created as the system of this world. However, we do need to understand it, and we need to understand why control in operation doesn't really operate when it comes to people. There is another option. and we'll talk about it tomorrow. But I hope that this process is helping you. It's definitely helping me. This is something I'm currently working through as a ministry leader, as a person who wants to impact change in this world and with different people, but also a person who understands that this world is not something that's ordered and neat and easy to work with. This world tends towards chaos all the time. I'm praying for you, and I hope that you're praying for Launching Legacies, because we're all growing through this process. But I'm also hoping that you are examining yourself and examining your life and examining the systems, the relationships, organizations, ways that you operate your life, and thinking about these principles in action, because there's no reason to be ignorant to the truth. Right? We need to know the truth so that we can find our way in the freedom of that truth. Right? And so we're praying for you. We'll see you again tomorrow as we continue our conversation about now receptivity, since we know control is not the answer. Okay, see you tomorrow. Until then, be blessed.